I'm Jono Buchanan, and in this video we're going to look at MIDI delay. Now MIDI delay is a really useful technique, particularly if you're a media composer working with string, brass and woodwind samples, and what you want to do is to make sure that those samples sound in time. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, let's just listen to this track and then we'll see the only problem with working with sustained samples. Okay, so I've written this quite John Williams-y kind of quite romantic cue for first violin, seconds, violas and cellos. And straight away, everything sort of sounds rich and lush and nice, and it's working quite nicely. But if I put in the click track, what we're going to discover is that actually all of these notes are going to sound late. Let's just put that in now, and we'll hear exactly the same track, but this time with the metronome playing. Okay, so there's the problem. Now you might think, okay, well maybe I just played these notes late and my sort of timing is a bit lazy, or maybe I was being sort of full of expression and therefore it sort of feels right that it's a little bit behind the beat. But if we open up the first violin part, what we're going to discover is that actually all of these notes are completely in time. In fact, they're quantized. Every single one of them is absolutely on the beat, and we can see each one, when I click on one, is going to be absolutely in that position. So clearly it's not where I've played these notes that is the issue, it's much more the way in which they're playing back. Now, the samples that I'm using are from Spitfire Audio's BBC Symphony Orchestra, and again, it's not their fault either. If you think about it, if you wanted to record a first violin section, or indeed any other instrument, and what you wanted to do was to make sure you had the full expression of each individual note that that ensemble group was playing, what you actually need to do is to record it from just before the note plays. In other words, if I was a violinist and someone said, right, I want you to play on the downbeat here, I'd prepare, I'd get ready to play and to drag my bow across the string so that the note spoke absolutely on the downbeat. And therefore, effectively, the very beginning of that movement would be silent. I'd actually start to move my bow ever so slightly before that beat in order to make sure that my note happened on that downbeat. In other words, the samples can't know that I want them to start and be full of volume on the downbeat if I'm playing them back from the very beginning of each individual note that I program. What I need to do is to find a way to shuttle them backwards in time so that the notes are in time as far as the click track is concerned. And this is where MIDI delay comes in. What I'm going to do is to put a loop around this performance so we can hear it playing, and we've already experimented with playing it with the metronome and discovering, of course, that the samples sound late. Now, I don't really want to go in and find all of these notes and shift them backwards. I could, I suppose, come in here and select all of these notes and move them off the grid and move them backwards so that they play a little bit earlier and then maybe they'll magically fall on the downbeat. I don't really want to have to do that because I want the notes to be in the right positions on the grid. There are all sorts of problems I might run into later if I've manually moved these notes. What I want to do instead is to use what's called MIDI delay. I'm going to select all four parts, and over on the left hand side here is delay. Now we tend to think about delay as being echo. It's another word for using a particular effect. This has literally got nothing to do with that. This is about the idea that we can delay the playback of the sounds that we use. Now, of course, if we further delay them, if we make them hold up even more, they're going to get progressively later and later and later, and that's going to be a problem. But actually what I can do with MIDI delay is to move things forwards in time as well as later in time. So if I just wanted to increase a sort of delay, in other words, ask the samples to play later, I can simply drag up here, adding a positive delay amount. And what this does is to push the samples back in fractions of a beat, 42 ticks in this case. But if I go the other way into negative values, then effectively I'm producing the opposite of a delay and I'm bringing sounds forwards in time. And if I take delay back to, let's say, minus 60-ish, or maybe a little bit more than that, what I'm going to do is to press play again, keeping the metronome in time, or to show me the time, and then we'll see whether or not these notes have moved backwards so that they actually feel a bit closer to being in time. And that's working much better. We can make a much more extreme version of that and take them so early that they actually start playing ahead of the beat, which is not what we want, but it will demonstrate the point. Okay, so now they sound like they're rushing. So I'm going to go back to roughly where I was before. So we've got rid of the MIDI delay, and we're going to just begin to discover now why it might be a problem. Because if you think about it, if my piece is only a string piece, I don't want the click track playing as I render the bounce or the mix of this piece. So what does it matter if the strings are slightly behind the beat? No one's ever going to know. Well, that's true. But if I start bringing in percussive instruments like a Celeste or a harp, or even some sort of untuned percussion sounds like orchestral snares or bass drums, then of course, because they have a really sharp attack portion, they're going to speak immediately. They don't have this slightly gradual start that we're hearing the strings, and suddenly the drums are going to sound before the strings do, and the whole sort of orchestral mock-up that I'm working on is going to feel out of balance or out of time with itself, and we'll see that now. What I'm going to do is to record a Celeste part for this track here, and we're going to hear that the Celeste is going to sound, and then the strings are going to sound late behind it. And it's interesting, I even find myself sort of wanting to play it slightly late. But if I was to quantize that, so it's absolutely bang in time, what we'll find is that the Celeste is ahead of the strings. So if we go back to the string parts and reintroduce our MIDI delay, taking it back to 65, minus 65, so that effectively these parts are playing early, hopefully we can kind of join up the gaps between those two parts. We'll turn the Celeste down a little bit too, so it's not dominating the mix quite so much. Now this technique can also be really useful if you're working with pads which have a long attack time. If they're feeling like they're just playing late, use MIDI delay to pull them back, because as we've seen in this video, what MIDI delay allows you to do is to delay the start of the notes that you've recorded. And if you think about it, a positive delay will push them later in time, whereas a negative delay effectively is the opposite. It's going to bring things forward in time, allowing you to make sure that the parts within your piece all feel like they're playing together.